Hello everyone, it is I, Eternal Flame here, and today we are here to talk about the entire topic that is the last panel of the most recent chapter, those entire eyes we saw, whether that is Gojo or not, and whether Gojo has returned, and most of all, what the impact is going to be of Gojo's return if Gojo has returned at all. Basically, in this video, I kind of want to cover the three possibilities that I think is possible of Gojo's return and what it could mean for the story as well as what could happen next. Now, I'm not going to cover why I think Gojo has returned, mainly because of the fact there are so many theories on that and I wouldn't really be able to add much of anything, so I don't really want to add that and like pan out the video more than it's already going to be. Basically, I want to talk about the three possibilities of what Gojo's return could mean for the story itself, and which one has the most cons and pros about his return, and what it could just mean overall for the plot. So without further ado, let's get straight into this. Now, the first possibility that I want to talk about in this video is mainly the one that I think is the most likely, which is the possibility that Gojo is not actually back, and it's more so Sukuna seeing a ghost of Gojo in the current moment or a hallucination of Gojo. Now, at first, when it was just the spoiler translations that were out, I was actually kind of 50-50 whether this was Gojo back or not, but ever since TCB ended up translating it, I was very much heavily on the side that this was Gojo's hallucination and not actually Gojo being here, and that was for a couple reasons. The main few reasons being the specific wording that TCB had actually used through the narrator, where the narrator ended up specifically saying, "What then befell Sukuna was a vision of a man he had buried with his own hands, the departed spirit of the strongest." Those words, at least in my opinion, make it massively more clear that this is most definitely a ghost and not actually Sukuna seeing someone that is alive, mainly because of words like the departed spirit of the strongest, and more specifically, the thing that actually got me on the side that this is mainly a ghost is because of the fact they only say that Sukuna was the one who had that vision. It wasn't Todo who was actually looking in that way. Sure, yes, you can make an argument that Yuji might not have noticed because Yuji was so locked in and focused, but if Todo would have noticed, then it would have made a lot of sense for the narrator to mention that or just say them. But they did not notice. Only Sukuna had noticed. Furthermore, the other reason that I don't think that Gojo is going to come back is because it doesn't seem like Gojo even wants to come back. The man ended up dying happy, knowing that he could rely on his students and have full faith in them, and that faith being completely repaid. Now, I'm going to talk a lot more about this aspect in the Gojo coming back to life section, because this is a massive con in that section, and I don't want to touch on it too much here. I just wanted to mention it for why I think it's even more likely that Gojo is not alive. So if Gojo is not alive, what does that ultimately mean for the story? Well, what I think that ultimately ends up meaning for the story is that this is Gojo taking one final look at the world, one final look at Sukuna to show that his ideology ended up winning in the long run. After all, Sukuna's ideology was that only the absolute strongest deserved to get whatever they wanted and deserved to be able to have the world basically bend to their knee. However, Gojo thought that one person should not be the strongest, one person should not be alone, that the strength of a group, that the strength of a people that people could rely on should be the ultimate strength. And this is Gojo staring upon that dream becoming a reality, that after the sacrifices of so many, not just Gojo, but Choso and Higuruma themselves, that they were ultimately able to end up winning and creating this future for them where no one has to be alone, where no one has to be the strongest alone. Which what this ultimately means is more than likely the end of the battle against Sukuna in Shinjuku. Now, I don't think that this is actually the end of Sukuna as a character or a narrative, mainly because of the fact that even if Sukuna does end up dying here, we still have to save Megumi, mainly because now Sukuna and Megumi are both going to be inside of their innate domain, similar to how Yuji was when they ended up dying. Man, I just said mainly cause a lot. Anyway, while the battle against Sukuna is definitely going to still be continuing, so even if Sukuna is done as a physical combatant in this part of the series, they're still going to have to battle Sukuna still no matter what, which means JJK is not over yet. But in my opinion, this is also the perfect place to end the battle in Shinjuku, with Gojo's dream becoming a reality and Sukuna ultimately being defeated despite all of the effort he had put in order to continue to fight, despite all of the binding vows he had made in order to continue to fight at full power. This also serves as Gojo offering one final contribution, because Sukuna was about to try and cast his domain again, but that brief moment of distraction that Gojo brought to him as a ghost, as a vision that Sukuna is more likely seeing because he is going crazy at this current moment being that close to death, which distracted him for long enough for Yuji to land a final blow on Sukuna and actually finish the final blow he was trying to land. It also could be possible that because Sukuna has been thinking about Gojo so much that on the final moments of his death, he chooses to imagine Gojo once again, which ended up truly screwing Sukuna over because he had not a moment to focus on something else when being put against someone like Yuji in the current moment who took advantage of that. So while I do think this is the perfect ending of this arc, what does this mean for the future? Well, there are two possible routes that it can go down. One of the routes I've already talked about is the potential final battle that happens between Megumi, Yuji, and Sukuna. Now, the reason why I think that this being a Gojo hallucination might end up spelling out the battle between that is mainly because the battle actually started out with Gojo versus Sukuna, so it's only fair that it ends with Gojo versus Sukuna on an ideological front, with it ending that Gojo's ideology ended up winning, before it then goes over to the mental and soul plane, where Yuji has to help get Megumi out of his current state, mainly because Yuji's the only one who can really enter into Megumi's soul, as we have already seen that Yuji is capable of entering into Megumi's soul when he tried to discuss with Megumi and get him back when him and Yuta were fighting against Sukuna, which might result in a final conversation between Megumi and Yuji, and with Megumi getting back on track, and then Megumi pushing himself to his absolute limits, and maybe even the potential of a three-way domain clash between Megumi, Yuji, and Sukuna, where they both are clashing domains against Sukuna, which would be a really cool way to end this entire battle, and really interesting way to show both of them getting their power-ups to becoming some of the strongest sorcerers to ever exist, cementing Gojo's dream even more, with Gojo being the final facilitator of this battle even being possible to happen. After all, this battle would have been completely impossible to happen without Gojo and the impact that he had left up to this point. So even though Gojo isn't really present, it's almost like he is present fighting for Megumi, because he allowed all of this to happen, and he was one of the reasons that they were able to get this far and actually be able to put down Sukuna once and for all. And also, in my opinion, I also think Megumi deserves to have some final type of battle with Sukuna, considering everything that Sukuna has done to Megumi up to this point. Like, I genuinely think Megumi deserves it as much, if not even more, than Yuji, and I genuinely think it should be a 2v1. I have been very vocal about my opinion that it should be Megumi and Yuji versus Sukuna. However, that's only one of the options that I can see happening, and there was a second option that I actually think is a little bit more likely to happen, but I'm kind of 50-50 on it. With that second option being that Yuji might literally rip Sukuna's soul out of Megumi's body by force. And with Yuji grabbing onto Sukuna's chest like that, I think Yuji is now going for literally removing Sukuna's soul from Megumi's body, whether Sukuna likes it or not. The main reason why I think that is, despite the fact that Yuji's now landed a total of 8 black flashes to Sukuna, not a single time did we see his soul interact with Megumi, despite the fact that Yuji landing less punches that were not even black flash amped, which we know the black flash heavily amplifies the output weakening effect, which would make the soul weakening effect even greater. He never had a discussion once with Megumi. So I do think that he actually just gave up on trying to get Megumi out entirely and is going for the other option, which is ripping Sukuna's soul out from the body forcefully and removing Sukuna through that way. After all, we now see that Yuji is literally gripping Sukuna by the chest with the claw hands, which might actually be the purpose of the claw hands themselves, because all the way up until now, we actually have no idea what the claw hands are even for. Like, yeah, we've made assumptions about the claw hands being blood manipulation, as well as soul manipulation, but we have no clue what the claw hands are for, and that could actually be what the claw hands are for, and because Yuji is doing that, he is putting Sukuna so close to death that he's actually starting to see the ghost of Gojo once again, in a similar way to how Nanami saw the ghost of Haibara, as well as Nobara saw the ghost of one of her close friends. Or at least Nobara saw the vision of one of her close friends. Not actually sure if that one's dead, but we know Haibara is dead. Like, in my opinion, this would be a lot more raw way to end the fight, because just imagine how cool this would actually look. But at the same time, I can see this going down 2 potential paths. Path 1 is Sukuna summoning the merger once again, and either utilizing the merger as his vessel, or just accepting that he has died and deciding, you know what, all of you get to suffer now dealing with the merger, good luck. Mainly because Sukuna is really that spiteful, especially against Yuji, so if Sukuna ended up activating the merger on his last wish to be petty, I could see that being something he very much does. But at the same time, I could also see it being possible that Sukuna ends up becoming the vessel for the merger himself, and that's where his soul ends up going, becoming Tengen's vessel. Or, well, not becoming Tengen's vessel, but Sukuna using Tengen as a vessel. After all, Sukuna ate Tengen for a reason, so that might actually end up being the reason why he ate Tengen, in order to trigger the merger on his last moments. This ends up massively solving the main issue that a lot of people have with the merger, me myself included, being the merger itself doesn't really have any final emotions connected to it. It's just some final curse energy monster conglomeration that we might end up having to fight, but it really doesn't have any emotions. It's just this giant thing that the world needs to be stopped. However, if it has Sukuna in control of it, or even partially in control of it, because it probably won't be fully in control because of how many souls are going to be inside of it, then it at least has some emotions connected to it, and at least actually has some value. Also, it allows us to see Megumi continue to fight, and Megumi's skills that he had ended up gaining from Sukuna having in control of his body. Basically, like any type of power-up that he might have ended up getting from being a vessel to Sukuna for so long. After all, Sukuna was active inside of him for a month and had used several high levels of Jujutsu, so Megumi is probably going to get a massive power-up from all of that, in a similar way to how all the other sorcerers got a massive power-up from the soul training. Either that, or they just have a final battle against the merger as a whole, and the merger is just the final antagonist. because this also could end up serving as a little bit of a break from Sukuna, because we have been fighting against Sukuna for over 30 chapters now. However, in my opinion, there is one more possibility that could end up happening, which is Sukuna uses Urame as a vessel. The main reason why I think this is a possible thing that could end up happening is mainly because while Urame and Hikari has mostly been a loose end, we are able to at least tell that Urame is more than likely having more of an advantage in this fight when you look at how clean Urame is in comparison to how damaged and dirty Hikari is. So Urame being turned into Sukuna's vessel at the last possible moment is also a possibility in order to continue this fight, as Sukuna basically moves up to stage 2, but now they have gained Megumi Fushiguro, as well as Hikari can now possibly enter into the fight, and it's basically all of them against Sukuna. But more than that, they also now have a way they can all go for the kill on Sukuna, mainly because I've had like this main thing that I've talked about for a long while, that this entire battle they have not been trying to kill Sukuna, but more so free Megumi. They have been going for shots that would save Megumi but not kill Sukuna. So now if Sukuna was inside of Urame's body rather than inside of Megumi's body, they could go for kill shots rather than going for non-kill shots and non-lethal shots like they have been doing. And basically everything I said about the entire merger thing applies here, but just with Urame instead, and now Urame is getting mass jumped as a Sukuna vessel. Also because I think it would be really cool to see Sukuna just use Urame as a vessel, as now having both access to ice powers and fire powers, and I think that would be a really cool mix to finally complete the entire chef aesthetic for Sukuna and push everyone to reach their final evolutions. However, that's where I believe the story could potentially go if this is just a ghost of Gojo. Either that or Sukuna could be motivated even more to even lock in even further, but I don't see this one happening at all if this is actually a ghost of Gojo. Basically, no matter what, if this is a ghost of Gojo, I see this being the signal that the battle between Sukuna and Shinjuku is about to end, and we're basically about to move on to the next stage of the manga, where the next stage of the manga is Sukuna transferring to a new vessel, Sukuna starting the merger, or Yuji and Megumi having an inner soul battle against Sukuna. That is for the future to be told. However, I do think that this is the most likely one, mainly because of the fact it does not have that many disadvantages, and it doesn't really shoot Gojo's entire character in the foot, and you're allowed to be a lot more free with this, mainly because, in my opinion, this one doesn't have as many risks as the potential of Gojo actually being revived, at least in my opinion. Alright, so you came for this section because you wanted to talk about the possibility of Gojo coming back, and what the possibility of Gojo coming back could actually mean for the story and what's going to happen in the future, as well as the pros and cons of Gojo coming back, which is what I'm going to talk about now. Now, I'm not going to talk about the hints that have existed for why Gojo could have come back. Two of my friends named Mira and Sage of Fitcavs both made amazing videos talking about this, so those are going to be suggested on screen now. However, I'm going to talk about now where I can see the story going if Gojo does actually end up coming back. So to start this out, I'm going to say this. Other than for most Gojo fans who really like Gojo and want Gojo to return, because I do know there are some Gojo fans who want him to stay dead, at the same time, this is probably by far and away the biggest high-risk, high-reward situation I have genuinely seen a mangaka pull off if he actually does choose to bring Gojo back. Because while keeping Gojo dead and as a ghost, in my opinion, is the safer option for a general majority of the fandom, if he can manage to pull off bringing Gojo back the right way, then it is genuinely going to be one of the highest high-risk, high-reward situations and have one of the massive payoffs. But at the same time, I also know the possibility of Gojo coming back is just going to ruin it no matter what Gege does for a lot of people too. But it still either way is a high-risk, high-reward situation that is entirely possible. However, before talking about the risks, I'm going to talk about the positives of Gojo coming back, because I do think there are actually some positives to Gojo coming back. Two main ones in particular, though. One of the main positives I can see about Gojo coming back is mainly having to do with himself and Megumi. This is mainly because I literally think that Gojo is the only one who could actually get Megumi out of this depression that he's currently in, and it actually making sense. Like, the main thing about Gojo Megumi needs to be remembered is Gojo is basically Megumi's father. No one who is currently alive knows Megumi better than Gojo does. So Gojo being alive and being able to help with that, I think would actually make a lot more sense to get Megumi out of the current depression that he has been in for the last month, thanks to everything Sukuna did in his body. Also allows Gojo to actually tell Megumi about his parentage, about Toji, and all of that good jazz, mainly because it actually would hit a lot harder for Gojo to tell them than Shoko to tell them, like how he said that Shoko would do at the end of their life. And there is also a secondary benefit to it, being we actually get to see Gojo's dream accomplished live, where characters start to reach the level of Gojo by fighting alongside Gojo, something that was physically impossible in the past because Gojo was just too strong and had too much of an area of effect. But now characters have reached such a level, probably stacked that with Gojo probably having to get weaker, that they are able to fight alongside him and not be a detriment, making Gojo's dream that much more realized. showing that Gojo was no longer alone as the strongest, because thanks to this battle and everybody's efforts, they were able to reach a level similar to the level that Gojo is likely going to come back in his nerf state. I don't think that Gojo is going to come back at full power. I think if he does come back, it's likely going to be due to him losing an eye. However, all of the characters, or at least some of the characters like Yuji and Todo, being able to be so strong they can actually fight alongside this nerfed and weakened Gojo would really show that his dream has a chance of being fully realized now. Especially if more characters begin to come onto the fray, like Yuta Okkotsu, like Maki, like all the people that he had faith in that would be able to join him as the strongest, to be able to create a group of the strongest rather than just one person being the strongest. However, in my opinion, that's mainly where I can see the two benefits of Gojo returning to the story ending. However, there are going to be a lot of cons if Gojo returns, which I'm going to begin talking about each of those potential cons about Gojo's return and why I think it is such a high risk, high reward scenario, because it is so easy for some of these to actually happen. Now, I think one of the immediate and biggest cons of Gojo's return is that Yuji is immediately going to be extremely overshadowed. Now, I know there are a lot of people who don't like Yuji as the MC, but there is even more people who do like Yuji as the MC and are finally starting to feel like Yuji is the main character of the story. Finally, with a lot of other people out of the picture and Yuji doing this much to push Sukuna and push himself this far, it has the potential of feeling like Yuji is no longer the MC with Gojo finally returning like this. A lot of focus that Yuji has had to get as the MC, that Yuji has had to earn as the MC, considering his relative position in the fan base as a whole, is about to be placed back onto Gojo if Gojo does return and this is actually him. Now, no matter how Gege does it, if Gojo does actually end up returning, some of the focus is going to slide back onto Gojo, and a lot of people are going to start calling Gojo the MC. Of course, there are potential ways to still make Yuji feel like the main character and not have Gojo steal a spotlight again, but it really depends on how Gojo does it to begin with. Like, if I'm being real with you guys, even right now Gojo is stealing the spotlight despite this might not even being him, which is another example of why this has such high risk. However, another one of the big cons that I don't think a lot of people have immediately thought about is mainly because of the scaling that ends up surrounding this if this is actually Gojo coming back. The reason why I think this is such a huge thing is because I want you guys to keep in mind what Sukuna's current state is in the manga. Sukuna's current state is he's extremely low on terms of his output. He has very, very weak RCT healing speed, if not any at all. He needs to put binding vows in order to utilize his domain, and he is missing several of his hands. Sukuna is very much put on the back foot, and most of all, he is still techniqueless because of domain cooldown. If Gege is going to end up adding Gojo to the battle, that means Sukuna is more than likely not even done yet or even that exhausted and still has power left to spare. The reason why I think that is even if Gojo is weakened, this is still looking at how massively weakened Sukuna should be by this point. However, if Gojo is here, it kind of proves that Sukuna isn't anywhere near his limit right now. Because at least if Gojo fights, that means Gege thinks that this extremely weakened and nerfed Sukuna is a fair match for Gojo, Yuji, and Todo at the same time. Or at least fair enough to consider it worth drawing and putting Gojo right back in to begin with. Of course, I don't know if Gojo is going to fight, and this one is actually a very avoidable con. However, at the same time, it is still potentially possible to be there, so it should be talked about and included nonetheless. However, in my opinion, the next thing we're about to talk about is much bigger in comparison to both what I previously talked about. Now, while yes, Yuji's ability to have a spotlight is important, as well as the fact that Sukuna might actually be much stronger than we think, are both incredibly important things, or that this might end up spelling that we're going to have to fight the merger one way or another. All of these are very, very important things. However, there's something that's even more important, which is the potential that this might ruin not just Gojo's death, but might destroy his character and assassinate this character as a whole. Now, I'm going to start this off with the Gojo death scene and Gojo's entire end chapter at the airport. This is something that most people can actually agree that this is one of the best ways to send off Gojo's character and end Gojo's characters. Now, yes, there are like two main issues of this, which were mainly the entire Gojo statement about Sukuna, about it would have been close if Sukuna had actually not had 10 shadows, and that entire debate, as well as the World Slash, which we recently find out why he was able to use the World Slash instantly, but that doesn't matter for this part of the discussion. A lot of people do agree that this was a really good way to send off Gojo's characters. Gojo gets to talk to all the important people in his life, the important people who had already passed away, and finally he gets to join them. On top of the fact that he gets to be able to feel that love that he'd been able to show to other people. He finally gets someone who can understand him, being Sukuna, and finally be able to be free of the burden of being the strongest. The burden that had always been on Gojo's life that he had always tried to overcome via having his students reach his level so he was no longer alone. and he ended up dying, being able to have faith in his students to be able to complete the mission from here on out, no longer needing to participate and having faith that his students could continue on his will. Gojo could die satisfied, being relieved of his title and being able to know that there were strong people he could reliably pass the title onto to be able to carry the next generation so no one would have to be alone again. That is what Gojo's death represents, and if Gojo does return alive, there is a very good chance it is going to null and void both of those things. Number one, and this has always been my main issue with Gojo coming back to life, it doesn't feel like Gojo would want to come back to life. Gojo died happy. Gojo died satisfied. He was able to die and defy the law of being a Jujutsu sorcerer, able to no longer die alone and be able to die with the people he cared about and loved around him that all could finally understand him because of the fact that Gojo was freed from the burden of being the strongest. This even goes back to Geto's question that he had asked him so long ago. Are you the strongest because you're Satoru Gojo, or are you Satoru Gojo because you are the strongest? Now, in my opinion, in Gojo versus Sukuna, he did actually end up answering that question, but that's for an entirely different day of how I interpret that question. But more importantly, back to that, he was now free of being bound by that question, because now he could just explore who Satoru Gojo truly was, now that he was no longer the strongest. And he could explore that with the people around him that mattered most to him, that he was never able to truly relate to until now that he was free of the burden of being the strongest. And now that the students were on the field, that everyone was on the field, this was the chance to prove if Gojo's dream was the right one or not. If it was possible, the true way to handle things wasn't by having one person who was single-handedly the strongest, but by having a group of people who could all be the strongest together and could never be alone. This is also why I genuinely don't believe that any of the students have actually died yet, mainly just to prove that Gojo's dream just has that much more of a chance of actually being right, because these people are the inheritor of Gojo's dream. The inheritor of Gojo's dream and belief that people should be the strongest together and there shouldn't be one person who's the strongest alone. However, I do want to note this as well. While it could be very, very possible that Gojo coming back might actually end up ruining the themes of his death overall and just ruining his character as a whole, there are possible ways to do it that it doesn't do so, which is why I'm so on the entire fact of this being a high-risk, high-reward situation. This isn't guaranteed to fail, in my opinion. There are ways that this can be done that adds to Gojo's character while also adding to the plot overall, but Gege needs to be so careful and so focused with this that it actually does do that. There are possible ways to do this correctly. There are possible ways to make sure this goes right. It all depends on the execution of it, and that's what I want you guys to keep in mind. Sure, there are going to be risks. There are potential cons that I can see, and I'm sure there are some that I even miss that you guys can see, but there are also potential reasons why this might end up being good for the story that I might have missed, that I want to hear you guys talk in the comment section down below on both sides, whether you think that Gojo coming back is the right thing or the wrong thing. But no matter what, I want to make sure one thing and one thing alone, to keep an open mind. If you go into this expecting this to be a bad thing or a good thing, your expectations will be skewed. The best way to go into this is going into it with an open mind, because that'll allow you to either temper your expectations or have your expectations blown out the water. Now, I'm expecting this to be a bad thing, but at the same time, I'm trying to let my expectations not come into my judgment, and I want to see what this ends up being, because I don't want to go in with bad expectations, because if you go in with bad expectations, you're already going to feel like it's bad no matter what is the way it's executed. At the same time, though, I do want to see what you guys expect in the comment section down below. I do want to see if you guys think that Gojo coming back is the worst possible move, or if this is what's going to save Jujutsu Kaisen because you think it's been bad writing, and I want to see what your reason is down below. I genuinely want to see some discourse in the comment section, because I really want to see what everyone's opinion is on this, because I'm just going off of what I've heard the most often and what I can immediately think of, but I'm still only one person, and I want to hear what you guys can think of as a community. But also, please do be kind to other people. Just because they disagree with you doesn't mean you guys need to start literal wars. I know we're known as like one of the most toxic anime fandoms, but come on, y'all are better than that. I believe in you. But yeah, that's my opinion on why I don't actually think that Gojo coming back is that likely, purely because of how high risk, high reward it actually is. But at the same time, if it's pulled off well, then Gege is just a god at writing. And now for this final section of the video, I'm going to talk about some of the theories that I've seen around this entire Gojo revival thing about who this could actually be. Because there are some people who genuinely believe that this isn't Gojo at all, and this is someone else that actually is going to appear in the plot later, and we're going to see that next chapter, which I'm going to talk about the 3 main common possibilities that I've actually seen from people. Now, up first, I'm going to go over one of the guesses that I've seen floating around, which this isn't actually Gojo at all, but this is Yuta Akotsu with the 6 eyes that have just awakened, and I think this is by far and away the least most likely one and just straight up impossible, especially considering the narration text that had just happened where it specifically said the strongest buried by the hands of Sukuna. So yeah, I don't think this is Yuta Okkotsu, especially considering something else, the fact that we see that the person has lighter hair, so it's not Yuta, because Yuta is always drawn with black hair. In comparison to this person, whoever they are, they do have lighter hair, which means it's definitely not Yuta Okkotsu, at least in my opinion. This is also not even talking about the fact that maybe the Six Eyes can't manifest in Yuta. Like, we don't know how the Six Eyes manifestation works, but ultimately, I still don't think it's Yuta Okkotsu no matter what it is. I don't even think Yuta needs the Six Eyes up to this point, considering how weakened Sukuna actually is from all of the attacks. Now up next is another possibility that I've heard most recently, which is the fact that this might actually be Kenjaku in Gojo's body, which this one is a lot more likely than Yuta Okkotsu, mainly because of the fact that we have no idea how Kenjaku's body transferability even works up to this point. But if I'm being honest, I don't really see why he would come back in Gojo's body. I don't know why Gege would write it like that. Like, I feel like that's completely unnecessary, and especially considering the fact that if he does come back in Gojo's body, how are they going to beat him? Now, yes, they could do some narrative thing of this is literally them surpassing Gojo, because now they have to fight someone who would likely be better with Gojo's technique than Gojo himself. So if they're able to surpass that, that means they finally accomplished Gojo's dream. But at the same time, I don't see Gege really writing it like that, especially because there's also the merge that might be an issue as well, and Sukuna, I just don't see the characters realistically winning, especially considering how extremely exhausted they are. Now, another possibility that I've heard most recently is an entire Twitter thread that I've most recently read on Twitter, being the entire theory that this might actually be Sugiwara Michizane. And for those of you who do not remember who Sugiwara Michizane is, that's understandable considering he is a light novel character, but he is one of the 3 vengeful cursed spirits who in the novels is stated to be around the same level as Gojo, considering Gojo himself isn't really sure if he could beat him, but he also is someone who carried the 6 Eyes plus Limitless, which would make the eyes be recognizable. But at the same time, I don't think this is likely, purely because of the fact that they are mainly a light novel character, and I don't see Gege just pulling a light novel character who has only really been noted in the series 2 particular times out of nowhere. At least that's my opinion. However, that's about everything I have to say about the entire topic of the potential of Gojo's return, if Gojo's alive, if this is even Gojo. That's about everything I need to say, so I want to hear you guys in the comment section down below, and while you're down there, please subscribe. It would genuinely help me a lot. Anyways, hope you all have a good day. Peace out. See you later.